Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 12 of Cameron's Nostalgia Podcast. I am your host, Cameron Strickland, and today I have with me Webster Colcord. How are you?
I'm fine, Cameron. How are you?
I'm doing good. Now, for any of you guys who don't know, Webster is an animator who worked for Nickelodeon and such more. And he worked for TV shows and films.
Should
And
I say something, or do I need to ask you if I should talk, or I feel like I should talk.
well, I was going to be asking,
Okay.
I would say he's been an animator for working on TV shows and films and some of the commercials. Um, okay. So Webster is here right now. And to get things off, I seen your logo on TV when I was a little baby.
Should I comment now?
Um, I used to watch the Nick Geo Productions logo on TV when I was a little baby.
Yeah. A lot of people your age and a little bit older have reached out to me over the years because they've seen, they grew up with that logo, and it's been real. It's been really interesting. I always wondered at the time, who was seeing it when it was on the Nickelodeon or Nick Jr. When it was broadcast, and when it was on the videotapes that you could get back in at the time. But of course, that was mostly before social media, and you didn't really know who was seeing it and how they were reacting. So it's really funny, 20 or so years later to more than 20 years later to get feedback from the audience.
Okay, so let's begin with our first question.
Go ahead.
How did you get interested in animation?
I think I got interested in animation when I was about very early. Like, my dad took me to a reissue at the theater of Fantasia, Disney's Fantasia. Have you seen that?
Yes, I've seen this.
Yeah, I think I was about 3 years old, and I think that really got me interested in animation. And then when I was older, of course, I wanted to do comic books, and I think it was Ray Harryhausen's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad that really, really got me interested. Actually, it was also Son of Kong and King Kong and Mighty Joe Young that were broadcast on television when I was a kid. They would broadcast it every year, usually in a row like that, and that got me also really, really fascinated with stop motion animation, specifically the kind of puppet animation that we do.
Okay. Fantasia was made in 1940.
Yeah. So when I saw it, it would have been about 1973 when I was 3 or 4, and it would have been a reissue because the Disney company was good about, they would reissue their films in rotation every 7 years or so.
Okay. So, what was your first animation debut?
You mean me as a professional animator, or just the first thing I tried to do?
An animator.
The first thing I worked on, well, I was very lucky. So when I was 18 years old, I had done a bunch of animation on my own, and I had even done some work in high school on an independent film, and we were doing all kinds of special effects and animation. So, but that film never got finished. And then when I was 18, I ended up getting a job with the Will Vinton studio in Portland, Oregon. And that studio was very popular at the time doing claymation. They called it specifically claymation, and they were very popular, having done the California Raisins, which some people would remember from the 80s. And so that studio was really hot at the time, and it was just a terrific place to start. And I was 18, and the first thing I worked on won an Emmy, and that was the Claymation Christmas celebration.
Oh yeah. Mhm. So, t- well, I seen some of the animation stuff on Nick. Hmm. And you made this logo.
That's right. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I made that after I had moved to the San Francisco area to work for DreamWorks. And I had already done some other work for Nickelodeon. I had done the first thing I did for Nickelodeon was a station ID for Nickelodeon, and it was called Monster Disco, and it was and this was one of the characters from that in the background. And there was a disco fly, and this is the armature for the disco fly, and there's this little disc fly head on top. And we built a rather large set, and it was a disco, and the floor had colors, and in the middle it's a Nickelodeon. And so that was the first thing I did for Nickelodeon, I believe. And then later I ended up they called me up to do two station IDs for Nick Jr. and one of them was with the crocodile characters, and the other was with hippos. And then later, and then I also had stuff that was broadcast on Nickelodeon. Like I used to do commercials for Converse kids shoes, specifically. Mostly people would remember Converse Touch Effects, which had this goo in the this sort of reactive gel in the shoes themselves on the surface of the shoe. And so those were broadcast on Nickelodeon, and there were a series of about three or four commercials with that this blue blob character. And then let's see, and then later they asked me to do this logo for Nick Jr. And I had moved and wasn't really doing as much independent commercial work as before, but I've set it up in my garage in San Mateo, California, and yeah, and had a friend of mine do the CG work, which was the productions letters that fall down. That was done in a program called Electric Image, and that was harder to do in a lot of ways than actually shooting the clay animation, because of course those were this was sort of, it's always tricky to mix computer graphic. It was tricky back then to mix computer graphics in with stuff shot on analog film. But the good part about shooting in 35 millimeter was that it's actually, when I scanned the film recently, it holds up really well. It's like super high resolution.
Okay. And what was it like working on the hippos I didn't?
The hippos one. I have some pictures I can send, or I think I did send you the pictures of working on that. That was really fun. So the crocodiles and the hippos were shot in a little studio that I rented in Portland, Oregon. And my friend Dave Waddle, who still works in animation in Los Angeles, he built the set for me. He built sets for both of those, and they were beautiful sets. Hippos was a sort of an African landscape with these really beautiful trees that were stylized. and it was very low budget. So, I mean, actually, it was high budget by today's standards, but budgets have gone down, and it was a very large set, and it was all made from foam, insulation foam, and then for the sky, my cinematographer John Ashley, who works at Leica now, I believe, he decided to go with a white sky, like as if which I thought was a terrific idea. And there's a pond in Hippos, and we just use a piece of plastic for that reflected the background. And I think I asked Nickelodeon, I had an idea of what the action should be, and I asked Nickelodeon, the people at the Nickelodeon on-air design department, like I asked them, like, can I make it a little longer than in time than what it normally would be? And they said yes. And I had this idea when I was shooting it to, have this little, this is the bee. I don't know if you can see it. It's the bee that flies in front of the, let me fix it. It's the bee that flies in front of the hippos and lands on the flower. I think it's missing a wing. Oh, this is the flower. Hold on a sec. Ah. Oh, here we go. This is like one of the flowers, and there. That's the flower with the bee on it that gets eaten.
All right.
Its little wings are posable.
Mm-hmm.
And when it flew, it was on a little string like that. And it was animated into the frame. So it was fun. It was a challenge because animating a four-legged creature is tricky, but it was also stylized. So I didn't have to be, their legs didn't have joints. The legs were just little cylinders, So it's very sort of simple in its design. But it tried to communicate. One of the things that I was thinking of when I was animating that was one of my favorite books, which is Ferdinand the Bull, where Ferdinand sits on a flower, and there's a bee on the flower, and it stings him, and they see him kicking around after having been stung, and they think that he's a very aggressive bull, so they take him to the bullfights in Madrid, Spain. But it turns out, he's a very gentle animal. So I was thinking of that when I was animating the bit with the hippos and the flower and the bee.
Nice. What about the crocodiles ident?
Yeah, so this is actually the rock that they were on. It's got a little blemish here. I can fix that. And they're a little bit, they've got a little squished in places, but that again, the set was built by Dave Waddle, and the lighting and camera was done by in that case, I think it was done by yeah, it was still done by John Ashley. And we had the camera zoom dollied in on that shot, so that was sort of that was more complicated. And the set was smaller than the hippos for the hippos ID, but it was still fairly large, and it was made to look like a swamp. And what Dave Waddle did was he took a piece of plexiglass for the water, and this sat on top of that. This just got a flat base, and it sat on top of that, and then there was sort of carved plants around that. And then we did a very simple two-dimensional background in layers. So there was a tree line in the background. And I think the animation on that was a little less straight, a little more difficult to do than on the hippos, in that I wasn't quite sure if the idea would work. Like one of the, the smaller crocodile comes up on the rock and then slips, and it's very hard to animate that convincingly, like somebody slipping and then being caught. That's very tricky. So I think that animation wise, the hippos one is more successful.
All right. And the Hippelseiden was shot in December 15th, 1996.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And the Crocodile Seiden was shot in January 5th, 1997.
No, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I thought they were shot closer together, but I don't know. It's been a long time.
Okay. What was it like working on the Nick Jr. Productions logo?
Well, that was much later. That was in 1999, correct? And I was living in California, and I didn't have a studio space to speak of. I had a garage a small garage in San Mateo, and I wasn't doing a lot of very small garage, and I wasn't doing a lot of production work on my own. I was working for DreamWorks at the time, but I had around there. I took a break to work on a Henry Selick film called Monkeybone, doing stop motion animation, and somewhere in that time, I got the call to do this logo, and it was a lot different of an experience, because I wasn't using my old film lab, and I had to find a new company to do the telecine, which is the transfer of the film to video, and I had to do some computer graphics in there. So it was a whole different adventure in trying to find the different companies to work with on it. And yeah, but the animation, the camera I used was a camera that was used on Monkeybone that I had purchased years before. And for the time, it was a very sophisticated, and I still have it. It was a very sophisticated 35 millimeter Mitchell camera. And so I could see the animation as I could preview the animation as I was shooting it, which is something that in the old days was very difficult to do. We had a system that the Will Vinton studio, Claymation studio, had made in-house, that was a frame grabber system. And eventually some guys had taken that in-house system and they packaged it up and made it more compact. And that was the Animation Toolworks video lunchbox. And so I had a video lunchbox next to my sophisticated 35 millimeter camera with a video tap, and I was able to preview the animation as I went. So actually, like, the animation of the Nick Jr. logo went really well. Like, I knew it was quite, it was turning out really well as I was shooting it. So I was happy with that. I was very confident that the action would get accepted by the client. And the client was Nick Jr.'s, Nickelodeon's. The client was in New York. Nickelodeon is part of Viacom, which is a big company that owns CBS. And I think at that time they owned CBS as well. They had purchased it already, and also Paramount. So Viacom, Nickelodeon is kind of a small company inside a much bigger company, and they have a West Coast studio. And I never dealt with the West Coast studio for this stuff. I dealt with their in-house. I think it was on the 5th floor of their Viacom building in New York, and I never went there. I just spoke, over the phone with a guy named George Guzman, I believe, and he passed away sadly. years later. I believe his name was George Guzman, and he was the Nickelodeon on-air design department art director, I believe. And so he was the guy who came to me and asked me for ideas about things that could be done in clay. And so so I dealt with him, and yeah, that's about it.
And
And it was the last thing I did with them. Yeah.
I did show you this.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it was finished, that was before HD television, right? That was standard definition. So about 720 by 480, actually 640 by 480, and then there was a slightly higher resolution that would be used for mastering video that was 720 by 486 or something like that. And so the ironic thing is that even though we shot it in 35 millimeter film, which the resolution of which is way above like 4K or 4K, or it's 35 millimeter film has a lot of resolution. We're still mastering it to standard definition or just slightly higher than standard definition, which is very tiny. And so we're throwing a lot of information away. And if we were to remaster it today, you could make it would hold up just fine to high definition televisions. But Nickelodeon hasn't really. I've tried to reach out to Nickelodeon in a few small ways. I don't have a contact there per se anymore, and I just haven't had any interest from them in resurrecting that old logo. I know fans would love to see it on the air again, but I just don't. If Nickelodeon doesn't want it, we can't do much about it. Even Nickelodeon's official Instagram, reached out to me, and I sent them a link, and I asked them if they would be interested in resurrecting it, and it wouldn't cost them hardly anything. I mean, I wouldn't be charging them a lot of money to do it, but no interest there, so far. So the fans, if fans want it, they need to really pester Nickelodeon.
All right. You will show the models for the logo.
Yeah. Yeah, I for a long time I didn't know where they were, and I thought maybe I had thrown them out, which seemed unlikely. But then I found them in a box, and unfortunately, over the years having moved, a lot, they got kind of mashed up in the box, and the head of Junior got lost. But they're just clay, and they're easy to fix. But the tricky part about, and I know, whoa, people have been bugging me about fixing them, but the tricky part is matching the color. That's the hard part. So that's the thing that's going to take me the longest. The sculpture is very simple, and the sculpture is mostly intact. The only hard part about fixing the sculpture is right around here with the end of Nick is a little smashed in, and that'll be tricky. But the hard part is going to be really is matching the color. So the way this worked was, when I animated it, I used the cell as a guide. I can't quite remember how we did it, but it was on glass, so the characters are just flat. But yeah, the tricky part about fixing those is going to be matching the color.
Okay. I did show you some sound effects for the logo.
Say again?
I think you could hear the sounds for the logo.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to do with the music. That was handled by the Nickelodeon people independently. They would hire the musician to do the music.
It sounded like this without the music. hear that?
I can't hear it, but I believe you.
Oh, I see. Moving on. You have worked on James and the Giant Peach.
Right. Yep.
And what was it like working on that film?
That was really interesting because I had worked only at the Vinton studio got big for a while, but it wasn't really a large studio, and then I had worked independently, and I'd worked a tiny bit in Los Angeles before, but I had never worked on a production that big. That was really a huge production, and it had many. It was well organized, by and large, and it had many layers of management. So that was the hardest part for me, is understanding, you know, what the rules were, and who you could talk to about certain things. There were a lot of protocols. The work itself was also challenging. I was felt pretty confident in my abilities as an animator, but Henry Selick is very uh, strict in his ways, the director. And so I did run into sort of some issues in certain shots that were, you know, I think normally not super challenging for me, but at the time very challenging, because I think I was very nervous, and when I get nervous, I tense up and maybe make the wrong choice. And so there were a couple shots where I was very nervous while animating, and so some of my choices were against. I sort of animate up to that point. I animated more instinctually, like I wasn't as disciplined as I became later. And so and Henry Selick really demands a disciplined and approach to animation. And so this is going to be boring for somebody who isn't an animator, but yeah, I needed to. I wasn't quite my way of sort of feeling through a shot as I go wasn't ideal for Henry's style of working, but I got some good shots in, and ultimately they were happy. We had one big shot that I did. It was a very slow moving machine, the studio, and it took a lot of work just to get each shot done. But there was one very big shot that I did with at the end of the film, with all of the bugs pulling up the ants by a rope, and we had a light leak, and I had to reshoot that whole thing. I think it took 4 days the first time, it took 3 days the second, or maybe it took 5 days the first time, it took 4 days the second, something like that. But it was that kind of thing. Like it was a very slow process, even for stop motion on that show.
Uh-huh.
But then later I worked on Henry Selick's Monkeybone, and in between working in on James and the Giant Peach and working on Monkeybone, I had gone through computer graphics training, and I had worked at DreamWorks on their first feature, computer graphics feature, Ants. Actually, their first animated feature, Ants, and the way I had to approach CG actually helped me structure my and discipline my stop motion animation a little more, And so I was, when you in those days in CG, you're really forced to plan out how you're going to animate each axis, each rotation of the character, of the character's limbs. So you had to be more disciplined, and so that improved my stop motion animation quite a bit.
Okay. I just love Monkeybone. And
Really, what? Let me interrupt you here. It didn't when it came. A number of people have said that, and when it came out, it only lasted 2 weeks in the theaters. Like it was a big, what they call a bomb. It didn't do very well. But in the time since, people seem to have discovered it.
all right. And what was it like working on Monkeybone?
Monkeybone was a very strange production because, of course, Henry Selick had a lot of plans to do multiple features after James and the Giant Peach, but they all fell apart and his deal with Disney fell apart. Luckily, he had a fan in Bill McKennick, who was the head of Fox Studio at the time, Fox Studios, 20th Century Fox, and they put the the film that Henry finally got greenlit after all these years was a very oddball film, Monkeybone. It's very strange. Even in the script form, it was very strange, and I was like, really? Somebody wants to make this? Okay. Um, and Fox it was difficult. The production was it was based in San Francisco, and the studio we rented is a famous old building at the time called Custer Avenue Stages, but it has a lot of history in the Bay Area production scene. And so we sort of bootstrapped this, you know, cutting edge visual effects facility together at Custer Avenue Stages. And one of the really funny things is, you know who the Mythbusters are, right?
Mm-hmm.
They built a lot of the models and the sets, and they were right across the street at that time. Jamie Heineman and Adam Savage and a bunch of other freelancers, they were right across the street from us on Custer Avenue in San Francisco. And, it was just a very, and Fox shut the company down for a while, for a month or so, in the middle of Christmas, just before Christmas, which was really sad, stressful. And it was just a very haphazard sort of, it was not the kind of production that we were used to with Henry, where it would be a long-term, like feature style production. This was just like um, sort of a fly-by-night, freelance operation that it seemed like Fox barely wanted to support in some ways. So it was a very difficult. It was difficult technically what we were doing. Also, some of the stuff that we did technically was more interesting. It was more interesting to watch the dailies with we built a Brendan Fraser robot, and the Brendan Fraser robot with Monkeybone, interacting with it is more interesting than what's in the final movie. And then there was a lot of animation, like most of my animation was cut from the movie. So, very strange production, very disjointed. And like when we finally had the premiere, it was apparent Bill Mechanic was no longer the head of Fox by the time the movie got done. And so what usually happens when that happens is the new person in charge sort of puts the last person in charge's productions like under the puts them in the closet, so to speak, as a matter of as a turn of phrase. They don't give them a good release. So, and that's what happened with Monkeybone. It didn't get a good release, and it was very weird movie. So, it didn't do well. But it's been interesting that it's become sort of a cult hit in the time since.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what about A Christmas Carol?
So, the Christmas Carol was much later. That was 2009 when I worked on that. And I had been working at a company called The Orphanage in San Francisco, which was a very good visual effects company. And I started working with them on a Korean production directed by Bong Joon-ho, who just won the Oscar a few years ago, called The Host. That was a monster movie. So I was the animation supervisor on that monster movie. And then eventually, around 2009, after a previous writers' strike, The Orphanage folded, went under. But luckily, nearby, Disney had made a deal with Robert Zemeckis to do motion capture movies. And so most of the crew went up to work at Image Movers Digital on Christmas Carol, which they were finishing up. So mostly that was just fixing little nuancy things, like you'd animate hands or you'd animate objects, and you do a little bit of character work on Jim Carrey's Scrooge, but by and large, the data was working in the motion capture. You just fixed things. You just made sure that, like, you know, people weren't going through the floor and people's hands were touching correctly, that kind of thing. So it was a lot of detail work, and it was a very big company and a lot of good people there. Sort of
Hmm.
more technical, yeah.
Well, the Nick Jr. logo was completed on September 9th, 1999.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And what about the community episode?
So
Abed's
that
Uncontrollable Christmas.
Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas. Yeah. So that was so there were these visual effects and animation companies don't last very long. They tend to go out of business. So first I was at the orphanage in 2009. It went under. I went to Image Movers Digital, and it was shut down by Disney in 2011. And so that was a lot of people in the Bay Area scene, the San Francisco area scene, that were out of work. So I, went down to LA briefly to work with some old friends. Teresa Drilling was the animation supervisor at Starburns Industries, which was a new company at the time, to work on Dan Harmon's Community. They were doing one episode in stop motion, and actually there's a stop motion scene that I animated that appears in another episode of the same season, I believe, or the next season. And uh, it was a lot of fun, but it was also super challenging. Um, and but it was really neat to be around that, to be around Dan Harmon and the actors. We got to meet Abed, the actor who played Abed, and so yeah, and it's really well written episode. So it was a lot of fun to work on. The puppets were very simple. The sets were quite beautiful. They went over budget on everything. um, and they had just set up the studio like a few days before we got in there to shoot. It was just an incredibly fast and efficient production.
All right.
And there were a lot of great animators on that who've gone on to do big things.
And what was the Nick Jr. logo filmed?
When?
Um,
When was it filmed?
in California.
Or where was it filmed? I just didn't hear where or when.
Where was the Nick Jr.
Oh,
logo filmed?
it was shot in my garage in San Mateo, California.
San Mateo.
Yeah.
How do I spell that?
SAN, that's one word. And then the next word is Mateo, Mateo.
Saint Monto.
No, SAN is one word. And then the next word, space, next word, Mateo, San Mateo.
San Mateo.
Yeah.
Oh, I get it. And you have worked on two TED films, which is directed by Seth MacFarlane.
I worked on all of the TED appearances. So we worked on the two TED films, starting in 2011, the first TED film, what was it, 2014, the second TED film, and then recently the TED series. But TED also appeared on the Jimmy Kimmel Show and a few other places, and I worked on that too. So I worked on everything to do with TED.
Mm-hmm. I like the fight scene where Ted is when
Oh,
John was saying when he was about 8 years old, he just got a Teddy Ruxpin. And Ted
yeah.
says, say that one more time. And then Johnny says, Teddy Rocks fucking pin.
Yeah, that was all worked out by our that whole fight scene was worked out by our stunt coordinator, What was his name? Oh my God, he's sort of famous. And what's funny is you see he's a professional stunt guy, and he has his own company, and I can't remember his name. Nice guy, and he, as stuntmen do, he sometimes appears in movies. And so shortly after working with him on the Ted movie, I saw him on screen on the beach in the SpongeBob movie. Like he was the stunt coordinator on the SpongeBob movie, and he appears on the beach. But I can't remember his name. But he and his stunt guys worked out all of the choreography of the hotel fight um, in advance. They shot it on video themselves, acting it out, and and Seth was totally happy with it right from the start. So that's called previs, but that's when you do it. So that's a form of pre-visualization, which we call previs. But when you do it with stunt guys, they call it stunt viz. So that was stunt viz.
All right.
Yeah.
What about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
I only worked on that in previs. And I think it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, right?
Hmm.
It wasn't, I mean, it was one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles directed by the Battle LA guy and produced by Mike, the Transformers guy, Michael Bay. And so we were doing previs at a company called The Third Floor, and I worked on the end fight sequence and how Shredder, falls off the building at the end. I've never seen the final movie, so I don't know how much they changed. But I worked on previs for that. And what was funny was they were like 2 weeks away from shooting it, and they hadn't figured out what they were going to shoot yet. And so uh, the people on set needed to know what to build. The people in charge of sets needed to know, like, well, what do we build? What are we going to shoot? And they're like, well, let's build the scaffolding. And so we worked out the choreography, and as it got closer to the shoot date, people hadn't made up their minds. So it was just like, well, it's like one thing leads another. It was like, just make the action happen around the scaffolding because that's all we have. So it was funny. We we were just trying to figure out what they wanted and trying a lot of different things. And then eventually they shot it. And I don't know what they ended up shooting, but we did a lot of previs of like a tower falling over. I did that, and the bottle of whatever it was, the green liquid, Shredder catching that, and Shredder falling off the building into a hole and being revealed. I don't know. I did a lot of different things on it, but it was all previs. It was all just trying to figure out what the movie was going to be.
And you've been filming for Zominatrix.
Oh, so I have some friends who are making a movie. They've been making it for a long time. It's called Zombinatrix. It's an R-rated. I don't know if it's a comedy anymore. But I thought it was going to be a comedy, but I don't know if they're going to get it done. Hopefully, and I was doing a few visual effects on it, and we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But that's at the top of my IMDb because they keep pushing the date further into the future.
And Zombinatrix was a horror movie.
Yeah, might be a comedy horror movie. Not sure.
And you did the filming for Shrine of being Shrine of Abominations.
So that is what I'm working on right now, and that is Shrine of Abominations. It's a rock and roll. It's like the style of the old heavy metal magazine or heavy metal movies. It's a stop motion animated monster movie, but it's in a fantasy world, and it's a Kickstarter thing that may go straight to a streaming channel. And the main force behind that is a guy named Skinner, who's a monster artist, and his buddy Ross Kennedy. And so I'm working for the two of them doing individual shots. Right now I'm animating zombie dinosaurs. So it's super fun.
And I saw that movie on YTV called Ants.
Yeah.
And this film was made in 1998.
Right.
What was it like working on that film?
So that was a really tumultuous, interesting experience because it was me moving from Oregon, where I had been working independently, to California, and going from stop motion animation to early computer graphics animation. And the system that the company I went to work for, which was Pacific Data Images, it was a very early CG. So we actually animated everything using a spreadsheet, which is incredible to think about today. And some of the animators there still use the spreadsheet to do their animation. Anyway, it was a giant, adventure. There were a lot of people involved. There was a lot of drama. The movie has a flood in it. You saw the movie.
Uh-huh.
So right before we were getting into the final push to get the movie done, we actually had a flood at the studio, and the whole building had to be cleared out because the basement level flooded. There was a bunch of damage. The power system. So it was a big mess. So there were a lot of parallels between real life and that movie. And it was working with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he would lie to us at the time. He said, we're accelerating the schedule of the movie, and we all suspected that it was to beat Bugs Life to the theater, but he told us that wasn't the case. And then later he said, I lied to you, and I admit that. We're going to beat Bugs Life to the theater. And so there was this whole one-upsmanship between, Pixar and Disney and Apple and DreamWorks, you know, um, you know, DreamWorks, Jeffrey had all these, this rivalry going. So we were all part of that, and it was very strange, you know.
All right. So, if any of the people who follow you and get into you, any social media stuff you're in?
What's that? What was the question? Where do you find me on social media?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look me up on Instagram. I think is the place where I'm most active these days. And then I also have a YouTube channel that I don't really put a lot of stuff out on YouTube, but I put a lot of stuff on my Vimeo channel. But Instagram would be the best place to find me. And they could just look up my name, Webster Colcord.
You know, if you only shoot one frame of video at a time and move the objects a little between each frame, it will look like they're moving on their own.
Animation.
It's a special effect called stop motion animation.
Yeah.
And to wrap this off, was there and so yeah. Well, Webster, thanks so much for your time.
You betcha, Cameron. Thanks for reaching out to me.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
So the best place to look for my work would be my Instagram. You can also find a lot of stuff I post to Vimeo, and just look me up, Webster Colcord. And I also have a YouTube channel. I don't put a lot of stuff on the YouTube, but I'm not hard to find. The projects I work for Tippett Studio most of the time these days, but I also work independently. And I've been working on, we did a film with Phil Tippett as director called Mad God, and I did a lot of animation on that. And I'm working with as I mentioned earlier, with an artist named Skinner and his buddy Ross Kennedy on a movie called Shrine of Abominations, which is like a heavy metal magazine come to life in stop motion with monsters and lots of color. So that's fun. And then I'm doing some work that you'll be seeing on. I can't really talk about it, but I did some work on a creature that the Tippett Studio did recently, and so that'll be coming out. Um, And yeah, I'm not hard to find. So thanks for reaching out.
Yes, I seen your work. And I used to watch the Nick Jr. logo on TV when I was a
Right.
baby in my old house.
Yeah, in Newfoundland.
Yes, I'm in Newfoundland.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. Uh, Stay tuned. There'll be more guests, which are gonna be from Swazo. Is two brothers named
I know them.
Patrick and Sean Johnson.
Yeah, I just ran into Sean about a week ago. They worked on Monkeybone.
Yes, Patrick and Sean worked on Monkeybone.
Yeah.
And so they were filming this before owning a company called Swazo.
Yeah. Yeah, I just attended a production with my girlfriend Melissa for with their puppets, and it was Glorious Ladies of Puppetry, or GLOP. They were doing a show as part of Sketchfest in San Francisco, and Sean was there, and so it was really nice to see him after all these years. And they've been um, doing the same thing, all these years, running their little puppet company, and it's just terrific that they have kept going, you know. And I hope that with the advent of AI, and everything becoming, sort of easy in a way. Well, we don't know yet, but it could be very easy for people to see a lot of CG that's done very kind of quickly and, kind of looks, like AI looks. That I'm hoping that people go will I'm thinking that people will probably go back to like wanting to see more simple handmade things like stop motion and puppetry, live action puppetry.
And Leah Armstrong and Camilla Portuguese were the owners of Images in Motion.
Yeah, Camilla. And what was it? Yeah, I don't know Lee too well, but I worked with Camilla.
Portuguese.
Yeah.
And Camilla was owning Images in Motion. And Lee Armstrong was in Monkeybone.
Hmm. Yeah. I think Lee was editorial. He was a coordinator, I think. Yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there'll be more guests coming up.
Great.
In 2 days, we're going to be interviewing, drumroll, Patrick and Sean Johnson. That would be awesome.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Okay, stay tuned. There'll be more guests coming up. Until then, peace.